Back to the campaign trail, Mitt Romney going after President Obama hard at last night's debate and on the campaign trail now over the president's relationship with unions, citing in particular the efforts used by federal regulators to stop Boeing from bringing thousands of non-union jobs to South Carolina.
There is without a question an egregious example of political payback where the president is able to pay back unions for the hundreds of millions of dollars they put into his campaign at the expense of American workers, American jobs, and the people of South Carolina. It's an assault on business. It's an assault on jobs. It's an assault on states that have right-to-work policies. It is simply the product of political favoritism and payback. It has no place in the American economy. And frankly, it should not be part of our political system. It's unseemly.
Well, this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And joining me now to discuss it in a fair and balanced debate, syndicated radio hosts Leslie Marshall and Lars Larson. Leslie's also a Fox News contributor. All right, Lars, so for those who haven't been paying that close attention to this dispute, it gets mentioned over and over. It's part of Romney's 7 points that he raises at every debate. He's very upset because Boeing is not being allowed to what?
In theory, the National Labor Relations Board is telling Boeing you can't operate this billion-dollar brand new factory to build Boeing 787 Dreamliners, and you can't employ the 1,000 people and another couple of thousand side jobs that would be involved in building this jetliner. Why? Because the NLRB says it was some kind of retaliation against union workers, machinists, well-paid professionals in Washington state who didn't lose a single job. Boeing went to them and said, can we get some labor peace if we build this plant here? The union said, no, we'll strike anytime we want, and they strike often. So Boeing said, fine, we'll build our next factory in a right-to-work state where, by the way, it's not necessarily non-union. You can join the union if you want to, but you're not forced to, as you are in states like Washington state. And the NLRB says then you can't open your plant, you can't build the Dreamliner, even though there's no other assembly line to build it on. So the unions don't benefit from this, and American workers get hurt. And a major American company that has the #1 export from the United States, jetliners, is hurt by this by putting $1 billion into a plant that the Obama administration wants to shut down. And the president says he wants jobs? What a joke.
Leslie, what of it? Because in July, the South Carolina had an unemployment rate of 10.9%. That is tied for 4th highest in the country. They say this Boeing Dreamliner plant that the NLRB doesn't want, I guess, is estimated to create up to 3,800 jobs in South Carolina. So what's the problem?
Well, first of all, Lars, don't tase me, bro, okay? But here's the deal, Megan, which Lars is forgetting to discuss, which is law. And, you know, remember when the president was asked about this, he said, look, and I agree with him, any company, any private company has the right to build plants and move plants state by state, including Boeing. The problem here is if it's legal. And what the Labor Board is alleging is that this is a violation of labor law, because it is a standard violation of labor law if you are moving jobs or a plant, as Boeing plans to, from Washington state to South Carolina in retaliation for employees, union members that strike. And there are Boeing executives on record that the evidence shows that the NLRB has, where the Boeing executives made numerous references to the fact that they would just move the plant to South Carolina to retaliate. And if that's the case, like it or not, that's illegal, and Boeing can't do that.
By the way,
how about that, Lars? Go ahead.
Megan, they did not move the plant. They built a brand spanking new plant in South Carolina that did not exist in Washington state. They said to their workers in Washington state, you all get to keep your jobs at the Boeing plants in Washington state. In fact, as of today, there are 2,000 more machinist jobs represented by the union in Washington state than there were 3 years ago.
So then what's the problem, Leslie? If they're not losing the jobs in Washington state, the union workers, but the Boeing's just going to add, estimated 3,800 jobs in South Carolina, how could it be retaliatory?
Well, because Boeing executives have stated so, and the Labor Board, oh, Lars, stop.
So it's just a question of motivation? I mean, you can be motivated to hurt somebody, but if you don't, in fact, hurt them, there's no damage.
But consider this, Megan. I mean, Americans, myself included, we want job growth, but I don't specifically want it in South Carolina. And I find it a little bit precarious that we have an election around the corner. South Carolina is a huge state when you factor into it politically, whereas Washington state doesn't factor in as strongly as South Carolina. The unions basically, and I think the Republicans, Lars, I know you'll never admit it, I think that you guys are upset that you weren't able to defund the labor board, and therefore you guys are retaliating against unions in this manner, which is very hypocritical.
Retaliating against government. Hey, Megan, retaliating against government is perfectly valid because the government is usually out there mucking the things up. The fact is they didn't lose a plant, they didn't move a plant, they built a brand new plant. And Leslie's wrong about this. When you have a law that says you can't retaliate, that's one thing to say if a strike happens and the company says we're shutting that plant down. That's not what happened. Boeing said, will you make this a favorable place to build airplanes? And the union said, no, we'll shut you down just as you're trying to deliver product. So Boeing said, if you won't make this a favorable place to build our new plant, then we're going to take our plant to a place that is favorable. Well, and if the Obama administration succeeds, you know where they'll build the next plant? Shanghai.
Well, listen, this issue's playing out right now with the NLRB, and then it'll go into the federal courts as well. And the reason we want to talk about it is because the viewers are going to start hearing more and more about it because it continues to come up at every debate. Lars and Leslie, thank you so much for outlining the issues.
Thanks,
thank you,
Megan.
See you soon.